The drug policy of the Netherlands officially has four major objectives: to prevent recreational drug use and to treat and rehabilitate recreational drug users, to reduce harm to users, to diminish public nuisance by drug users, to combat the production and trafficking of recreational drugs. By contrast, most other countries take the point of view that recreational drug use is detrimental to society and must therefore be outlawed. This has caused friction between the Netherlands and other countries about the policy for cannabis, most notably with France and Germany. As of 2004, Belgium seems to be moving toward the Dutch model, and a few local German legislators are calling for experiments based on the Dutch model. Switzerland has had long and heated parliamentary debates about whether to follow the Dutch model on cannabis, most recently deciding against it in 2004. Currently, a ballot initiative is in the works on the question. A new law came into force in the Netherlands requiring people to have membership cards to gain entry to coffee shops. These cards are only available to residents of the Netherlands who need to apply for the card. This was promptly adopted by several provinces, including the cities of Maastricht and Eindhoven. There were proposals for this to apply to Amsterdam in 2012, although after fierce opposition from the mayor of Amsterdam and many coffee shop owners in Amsterdam, the government decided to allow the individual provinces to determine their own policy, of which Amsterdam rejected the membership cards, and therefore the entry to coffee shops and the sale of cannabis remains permissible to anyone over the age of 18. By test, a few coffee shops in the south of the Netherlands were already forced to handle this new law. Residents are complaining about growing criminality problems due to drug dealers in the streets. If seen to fruition, which seems likely, the new laws will reduce tourism in the Netherlands dramatically and cost the exchequer millions in lost revenue, and well-established business are forecast to go bankrupt. The club owners argue that the previous law opened the door for other European nations with relaxed attitudes on cannabis to capitalize on the niche in the market and take the valuable tourist resource. Maastricht's Association of Coffee Shop Owners lost in June 2012 in a Dutch court a legal challenge of the new rules against the city's mayor. Amsterdam has decided to not enforce the new law and will continue to sell to tourists, while the legalization of cannabis remains controversial. The introduction of heroin-assisted treatment in 1998 has been lauded for considerably improving the health and social situation of opiate-dependent patients in the Netherlands. Public health. Large-scale dealing, production, import and export are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, even if it does not supply end users or coffee shops with more than the allowed amounts. Exactly how coffee shops get their supplies is rarely investigated. However, the average concentration of THC in the cannabis sold in coffee shops has increased from 9% in 1998 to 18% in 2005. This means that less plant material has to be consumed to achieve the same effect. One of the reasons is plant breeding and use of greenhouse technology for illegal growing of cannabis in Netherlands. The former Minister of Justice Piet Hein Donner announced in June 2007 that cultivation of cannabis shall continue to be illegal. Non-enforcement. The drug policy of the Netherlands is marked by its distinguishing between so-called soft and hard drugs. An often used argument is that alcohol, which is claimed by some scientists as a hard drug, is legal, and a soft drug can't be more dangerous to society if it's controlled. This may refer to the prohibition in the 1920s, when the U.S. government decided to ban all alcohol. Prohibition created a golden opportunity for organized crime syndicates to smuggle alcohol, and as a result the syndicates were able to gain considerable power in some major cities. Cannabis remains a controlled substance in the Netherlands, and both possession and production for personal use are still misdemeanors, punishable by fines. Coffee shops are also technically illegal but are flourishing nonetheless. However, a policy of non-enforcement has led to a situation where reliance upon non-enforcement has become common, and because of this, the courts have ruled against the government when individual cases were prosecuted. This is because the Dutch Ministry of Justice applies a gedoogbeeld with regard to the category of soft drugs, an official set of guidelines telling public prosecutors under which circumstances offenders should not be prosecuted. This is a more official version of a common practice in other European countries wherein law enforcement sets priorities regarding offences on which it is important enough to spend limited resources. According to current gedoogbeeld, the possession of a maximum amount of 5 grams cannabis for personal use is not prosecuted. Cultivation is treated in a similar way. Cultivation of 5 plants or less is usually not prosecuted when they are renounced by the cultivator. Proponents of gedoogbeeld argue that such a policy practices more consistency in legal protection than without it. Opponents of the Dutch drug policy either call for full legalization, or argue that laws should penalize morally wrong or deviant behavior, whether enforceable or not. In the Dutch courts, however, it has long been determined that the institutionalized non-enforcement of statutes with well-defined limits constitutes de facto decriminalization. The statutes are kept on the books mainly due to international pressure and in adherence with international treaties. A November 2008 poll showed that a 60% majority of the Dutch population support the legalization of soft drugs. The same poll showed that 85% supported closing of all cannabis coffee shops within 250 meters walking distance from schools. Drug law enforcement. Importing and exporting of any classified drug is a serious offense. The penalty can run up to 12 to 16 years if it is hard drug trade, maximum 4 years for import or export of large quantities of cannabis. It is prohibited to operate a motor vehicle while under the influence of any drug that affects driving ability to such an extent that you are unable to drive properly. The Dutch police have the right to do a drug test if they suspect influenced driving. For example, anybody involved in a traffic accident may be tested. Causing an accident that inflicts bodily harm, while under influence of any drug, is seen as a crime that may be punished by up to 3 years in prison. Suspension of driving license is also normal in such a case. Schiphol, a large international airport near Amsterdam, has long practiced a zero-tolerance policy regarding airline passengers carrying drugs. In 2006 there were 20,769 drug crimes registered by public prosecutors, and 4,392 persons received an unconditional prison sentence. The rate of imprisonment for drug crimes is about the same as in Sweden, which has a zero-tolerance policy for drug crimes. Despite the high priority given by the Dutch government to fighting illegal drug trafficking, the Netherlands continue to be an important transit point for drugs entering Europe. The Netherlands is a major producer and leading distributor of cannabis, heroin, cocaine, amphetamines and other synthetic drugs, and a medium consumer of illicit drugs. Despite the crackdown by Interpol on traffic and illicit manufacture of temazepam, the country has also become a major exporter of illicit temazepam of the jelly variety, trafficking it to the United Kingdom and other European nations. The Netherlands Special Synthetic Drug Unit, set up in 1997 to coordinate the fight against designer drugs, appears to be successful. The government has intensified cooperation with neighboring countries and stepped up border controls. In recent years, it also introduced so-called 100% checks and body scans at Schiphol Airport on incoming flights from Dutch overseas territories Aruba and Netherlands Antilles to prevent importing cocaine by means of swallowing balloons by mules. Although drug use, as opposed to trafficking, is seen primarily as a public health issue, responsibility for drug policy is shared by both the Ministry of Health, Welfare, and Sports, and the Ministry of Justice. The Netherlands spends more than €130 million annually on facilities for addicts, of which about 50% goes to drug addicts. The Netherlands has extensive demand reduction programs, reaching about 90% of the country's 25,000 to 28,000 hard drug users. The number of hard drug addicts has stabilized in the past few years and their average age has risen to 38 years, which is generally seen as a positive trend. Notably, the number of drug-related deaths in the country remains amongst the lowest in Europe. On 27 November 2003, the Dutch Justice Minister Piet Hein Donner announced that his government was considering rules under which coffee shops would only be allowed to sell soft drugs to Dutch residents in order to satisfy both European neighbors' concerns about the influx of drugs from the Netherlands, as well as those of Netherlands border town residents unhappy with the influx of drug tourists from elsewhere in Europe. The European Court of Justice ruled in December 2010 that Dutch authorities can ban coffee shops from selling marijuana to foreigners. The EU court said the southern Dutch city of Maastricht was within its rights when it introduced a weed passport in 2005 to prevent foreigners from entering cafes that sell marijuana. In 2010, the owner of Netherlands' largest cannabis-selling coffee shop was fined €10 million for breaking drug laws by keeping more than the tolerated amount of cannabis in the shop. He was also sentenced to a 16-week prison term. Results of the drug policy. Criminal investigations into more serious forms of organized crime mainly involve drugs. Most of these are investigations of hard drug crime, although the number of soft drug cases is rising and currently accounts for 69% of criminal investigations. In a study of the levels of cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy, meth and other amphetamine in wastewater from 42 major cities in Europe, Amsterdam came near the top of the list in every category but meth. In the province of North Brabant in the south of the Netherlands, the organized crime organizations form the main producer of MDMA, amphetamine and cannabis in Europe. Together with the proximity of the ports of Antwerp and especially Rotterdam, where heroin and cocaine enter the European continent, this causes these substances to be readily available for a relative low price. Therefore, there is a large quantity drugs of a relative high quality with few pollution available. This means that users will not have to rely on more polluted substances with greater health risks. Together with an approach that focuses on easily accessible healthcare, harm reduction and prevention, this causes the medical condition of the Dutch addicts to be less severe than that of many other countries. Implications of international law. The Netherlands is a party to the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, and the 1988 United Nations Convention against Illicit Traffic in Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances. The 1961 Convention prohibits cultivation and trade of naturally occurring drugs such as cannabis. The 1971 treaty bans the manufacture and trafficking of synthetic drugs such as barbiturates and amphetamines, and the 1988 Convention requires states to criminalize illicit drug possession, subject to its constitutional principles and the basic concepts of its legal system. Each party shall adopt such measures as may be necessary to establish as a criminal offense under its domestic law, when committed intentionally, the possession, purchase or cultivation of narcotic drugs or psychotropic substances for personal consumption contrary to the provisions of the 1961 Convention. The 1961 Convention as amended, or the 1971 Convention. The International Narcotics Control Board typically interprets this provision to mean that states must prosecute drug possession offenses. The conventions clearly state that controlled substances are to be restricted to scientific and medical uses. However, Cindy Fazy, former chief of demand reduction for the United Nations Drug Control Program, believes that the treaties have enough ambiguities and loopholes to allow some room to maneuver. In her report entitled The Mechanics and Dynamics of the UN System for International Drug Control, she notes, many countries have now decided not to use the full weight of criminal sanctions against people who are in possession of drugs that are for their personal consumption. The conventions say that there must be an offense under domestic criminal law. It does not say that the law has to be enforced, or that when it is what sanctions should apply. Despite such gray areas, latitude is by no means unlimited. The centrality of the principle of limiting narcotic and psychotropic drugs for medical and scientific purposes leaves no room for the legal possibility of recreational use. Nations may currently be pushing the boundaries of the international system, but the pursuit of any action to formally legalize non-medical and non-scientific drug use would require either treaty revision or a complete or partial withdrawal from the current regime. The Dutch policy of keeping anti-drug laws on the books while limiting enforcement of certain offences is carefully designed to reduce harm while still complying with the letter of international drug control treaties. This is necessary in order to avoid criticism from the International Narcotics Board, which historically has taken a dim view of any moves to relax official drug policy.